Major Rebecca Martinez had been flying F-18 Super Hornets for 8 years when she received orders to report to Nellis Air Force Base for what her commanding officer described as a routine training exercise. The desert heat shimmered off the tarmac as she stepped out of her rental car, her flight bag slung over her shoulder. Something felt different about this assignment from the moment she walked into the briefing room. The other pilots barely acknowledged her presence, their conversations dying to whispers whenever she approached. Colonel James Harrison stood at the front of the room, his weathered face betraying nothing as he outlined the mission parameters. They would be conducting synchronized flight formations over the Nevada desert, testing new communication protocols between aircraft. Rebecca had participated in dozens of similar exercises, but the tension in the room was palpable. She noticed the way Harrison's eyes seemed to avoid hers, how his jaw tightened when he mentioned her call sign. The trouble had started 3 months earlier at Miramar Air Station. Rebecca had filed a formal complaint against Lieutenant Colonel David Brennan after witnessing him falsify maintenance records on several aircraft. The planes had been cleared for flight despite having critical safety issues that could have resulted in catastrophic failure. When she brought her concerns to the chain of command, Brennan had laughed it off, telling her that women didn't understand the complexities of military aviation. Rebecca's persistence in pursuing the matter had made her enemies. Brennan was well connected, the son of a retired general, and had friends throughout the upper ranks of the Air Force. Her complaint had been buried in bureaucratic red tape, dismissed as the hysterical concerns of a female pilot trying to prove herself in a man's world. The message was clear: shut up and fly, or face the consequences. Now, standing in the Nevada desert, Rebecca wondered if this training exercise was part of those consequences. The other pilots in her squadron were all Brennan's allies, men who had made it clear they believed she didn't belong in the cockpit. Captain Mike Thompson, Brennan's protege, had been particularly vocal about his opinions regarding female pilots. He'd once told her that women were a distraction in combat situations, their emotional instability, a liability that endangered everyone. As the briefing concluded, Rebecca caught fragments of conversation between Thompson and Major Steve Collins. They were discussing flight formations and radio frequencies, but something in their tone made her uneasy. When she tried to join the conversation, both men fell silent, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. Thompson excused himself abruptly, leaving Rebecca with the uncomfortable feeling that she was being deliberately excluded from crucial information. The squadron was scheduled to fly at dawn, 6 F-18s in tight formation across the desert landscape. Rebecca had flown with most of these pilots before, but never under circumstances that felt so charged with unspoken hostility. As she made her way to the quarters assigned to her, she couldn't shake the feeling that this training exercise was designed to be anything but routine. Lieutenant Amy Foster was the only person who seemed genuinely pleased to see Rebecca. A newer pilot with just 2 years of experience, Foster had always looked up to Rebecca as a role model. Over dinner in the base cafeteria, Foster mentioned something that made Rebecca's blood run cold. She had overheard Thompson and Collins discussing radio frequencies that weren't listed in the official mission briefing. The next morning, Rebecca performed her pre-flight inspection with extra care. Every system was checked and double-checked, every gauge and indicator scrutinized. Her crew chief, Sergeant Martinez, seemed nervous as he signed off on the aircraft, his usual easy banter replaced by terse, professional exchanges. When Rebecca asked if everything was okay, he simply nodded and wished her good luck with an intensity that felt more like a warning. As the 6 F-18s taxied toward the runway, Rebecca reviewed the mission parameters one more time. They would fly in formation across the desert, practicing communication protocols and testing new equipment. The exercise was scheduled to last 3 hours, covering a flight path that would take them over some of the most remote and inhospitable terrain in Nevada. If something went wrong out there, help would be hours away. The aircraft lifted off in perfect formation, 6 deadly machines cutting through the morning sky. Rebecca took her assigned position in the formation, maintaining precise spacing and altitude as they climbed toward their cruising altitude. The desert stretched endlessly below them, a harsh landscape of rock and sand that had claimed countless lives over the decades. 15 minutes into the flight, Rebecca noticed the first anomaly. Thompson's aircraft began to drift slightly out of formation, a movement so subtle that it might have been dismissed as normal variation. But Rebecca's trained eye caught the pattern immediately. The other aircraft were beginning to adjust their positions as well, creating a formation that wasn't in the briefing materials. She keyed her radio to request clarification, but was met with static. A chill ran down her spine as she realized her communication system was being jammed. The other aircraft continued their subtle repositioning, and Rebecca found herself isolated in the center of what was becoming a very different kind of formation. The training exercise had become something else entirely. Major Collins' voice crackled through the static, his transmission directed to the other aircraft, but clearly intended for Rebecca to hear. He was discussing mechanical failures and emergency procedures, his tone casual despite the ominous implications of his words. Rebecca's hands tightened on the controls as she realized the true nature of this mission. The formation was tightening around her, 6 aircraft moving with deadly precision. Rebecca had participated in enough combat exercises to recognize the pattern. This wasn't a training formation. It was a kill box. The other pilots were positioning themselves to eliminate her aircraft while making it appear to be an accident. In the remote Nevada desert with her communications jammed, she would simply disappear. Rebecca's mind raced as she considered her options. She could try to break formation and flee, but the other aircraft were newer and faster. A direct confrontation would be suicide. Instead, she began to implement emergency procedures, broadcasting on multiple frequencies despite the jamming. Someone, somewhere, had to be listening. The desert below offered no sanctuary, but Rebecca knew the terrain better than her would-be executioners realized. During her years of service, she had studied every emergency landing site, every geographical feature that might provide cover or concealment. There was an old mining road about 30 miles to the northeast, barely visible from the air, but wide enough for an emergency landing. As the formation continued its deadly dance, Rebecca made a decision that would change everything. She would not go quietly into the desert night. If Brennan and his allies wanted to eliminate her, they would have to do it in a way that couldn't be covered up or explained away. She began to document everything, using her aircraft's recording systems to capture every radio transmission, every movement of the other aircraft. The morning sun climbed higher, and the desert heat began to create thermals that made flying more challenging. Rebecca used the turbulence to her advantage, making small adjustments to her position that appeared to be responses to the changing air conditions. In reality, she was maneuvering toward the edge of the formation, preparing for what she knew would be a desperate gambit. Thompson's aircraft moved closer, its weapons systems clearly visible in the morning light. Rebecca realized with growing horror that this wasn't just about silencing her testimony against Brennan. This was about sending a message to any other female pilots who might dare to challenge the old boys' network. Her death would be a warning, a reminder of what happened to women who forgot their place. The radio crackled again, and this time Rebecca heard something that made her heart race. It was a new voice, unfamiliar but clearly monitoring their frequency. Someone else was out there, someone who wasn't part of the conspiracy. The voice was requesting identification and mission status, the standard protocol for unknown aircraft in restricted airspace. Rebecca's training kicked in as she realized this might be her only chance. She began to maneuver more aggressively, breaking formation protocols in a way that would force the other pilots to respond. If they were going to kill her, they would have to do it in full view of whoever was monitoring their frequency. The other aircraft responded immediately, their movements becoming more overtly threatening. Thompson's F-18 locked onto Rebecca's aircraft, the targeting system's warning tone filling her cockpit. The moment of truth had arrived. Rebecca keyed her radio and broadcast on every frequency she could access, her voice clear and steady despite the mortal danger. She identified herself by name and rank, stated her position, and declared that she was under attack by friendly forces. The transmission went out across the desert, picked up by military installations, civilian airports, and aircraft scattered across the region. Whatever happened next, there would be witnesses. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Multiple voices flooded the radio frequencies, demanding explanations, requesting position reports, and scrambling rescue assets. The conspiracy that had seemed so airtight moments before was suddenly exposed to the harsh light of scrutiny. Thompson's aircraft broke off its attack run, the formation dissolving into chaos as the other pilots realized their plan had been compromised. Rebecca seized the moment, diving toward the desert floor and heading for the mining road she had spotted earlier. Her aircraft screamed across the landscape, pursued by the other F-18s, but no longer in immediate danger of being shot down. The radio chatter continued, with air traffic controllers and military commanders demanding explanations from the pilots who had just attempted to commit murder in full view of half the Air Force. The landing was rough, Rebecca's aircraft skidding across the sandy surface of the mining road before coming to rest against a boulder. She was bruised but alive, her survival a testament to her skill and the desperate courage that had driven her to expose the conspiracy. As she climbed from the cockpit, she could hear helicopters approaching, their rotors cutting through the desert air. The rescue team that reached her included investigators from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, their presence indicating that this incident would not be swept under the rug. Rebecca's recorded transmissions had been heard by dozens of people, creating a paper trail that could not be ignored or explained away. The conspiracy against her had become a public scandal. Over the following days, the full scope of the plot emerged. Brennan had orchestrated the entire scheme, using his connections to arrange what was supposed to be Rebecca's final flight. The other pilots had been convinced that she posed a threat to unit cohesion and flight safety, their loyalty to Brennan overriding their moral judgment. The plan had been to eliminate her during the training exercise, making it appear that she had suffered a mechanical failure or pilot error. The investigation revealed a pattern of harassment and intimidation directed at female pilots throughout the Air Force. Rebecca's case was not isolated. Other women had been subjected to similar treatment, though none had faced such an extreme response. The scandal rocked the military aviation community, leading to congressional hearings and a complete review of gender integration policies. Brennan was court-martialed and sentenced to life in prison for conspiracy to commit murder. Thompson and Collins received lengthy prison sentences for their roles in the plot. The other pilots involved faced various punishments, their careers effectively ended by their participation in the conspiracy. The broader investigation led to the removal of dozens of officers who had enabled or participated in the systematic harassment of female personnel. Rebecca's courage in exposing the conspiracy made her a hero to many, But the victory came at a tremendous personal cost. She was reassigned to a desk job, her flying career effectively ended by the trauma of the experience. The knowledge that her fellow pilots had tried to kill her left deep psychological scars that would take years to heal. The case became a landmark in military justice, establishing important precedents for protecting whistleblowers and investigating complaints of gender discrimination. Rebecca's story inspired other women to come forward with their own experiences, leading to significant reforms in military culture and policy. But for Rebecca, the real victory was simply surviving. She had faced down a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of her chain of command, risking everything to expose corruption and protect future generations of female pilots. The death stamp that had seemed so certain in the Nevada desert had been avoided through courage, skill, and the determination to fight for what was right. The desert had witnessed many tragedies over the years, but on this day, it had also witnessed a triumph of justice over corruption, of courage over intimidation. Rebecca Martinez had flown into the desert as a target, but she had emerged as a symbol of resistance against those who would use their power to silence the truth. Years later, as she worked to help other victims of military harassment, Rebecca would often think about that morning in the Nevada desert. The synchronized F-18s that had seemed so menacing had ultimately failed in their mission, not because of mechanical failure or pilot error, but because one person had refused to be silenced. The death stamp from Red Valley had been broken, and with it, a conspiracy that had seemed untouchable. The story of Major Rebecca Martinez became required reading at military academies, a reminder that courage comes in many forms, and that standing up for what is right sometimes requires risking everything. Her legacy lived on in the policies that protected future generations of service members, ensuring that the conspiracy she had exposed could never again threaten those who chose to serve their country with honor and integrity. The desert winds continued to blow across the Nevada landscape, carrying with them the memory of a day when justice prevailed over corruption, when one person's courage had exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power. The F-18s that had once threatened death had instead delivered a message of hope to all who would follow in Rebecca's footsteps.